Alright, this is Yahweh. These are the secret Yahweh tapes. This is volume 5. The day is wearing on for we three. We are getting a little tired, I think, of my voice collectively. I think that's fair to say. And I appreciate these two gentlemen's time and their efforts in helping me get this all down. Spent a lot of time while on Earth, living in Russia, and a good deal of time up in Siberia, which was very difficult for me personally because the cold is very difficult for my body to handle. I have not been warm one day on this planet since I got here. And the time that I spent in Russia was a very difficult time for me from a physical sense because so much of it I was unable to move in a normal fashion. And towards the end of the 19th century, I became aware of a pilgrim, Grigory Rasputin, who was a mystic in the forest and who was known for loud, boisterous praying, and who was thought to have the power to heal people through his praying, or through his prayer. And I decided to go and visit this Rasputin and see for myself. And when I got to his camp, I call it a camp, it was very disheveled. It was not something that you would associate with a civilized person inhabiting. Let's say the man lived like and smelled like a wild animal. His stench was overpowering, even by Russian standards, even by the standards of the day. You could smell him in the forest coming, even before you could hear his footsteps. Grigory, when I first met him, looked at me in a way that quite frankly, almost frightened me. I developed control of what you would term a fear reflex many centuries before. When I first got to this planet, I experienced anxiety and fear on a regular basis. Nothing extreme, but for me it was very unusual and somewhat frightening at times. And I had, over the years, developed a very clear understanding of the level to which I was protected while I was on this planet. It's funny to me how some legends are spawned. I spent time in Eastern Europe where I was actually captured and they attempted to torture me in the castle that later came to be known as that of Vlad the Impaler. And I was a very frustrating subject, I guess, for these sick and twisted men who had developed a real taste for inflicting pain and suffering. At one time, they began to cut off my fingers one by one, and as my fingers began to grow back, and as I showed no sign of pain or suffering, these men became very afraid, and both of them leapt to their deaths. These men that were torturing me from this high vantage point tower in which I was being held. And I take credit then for spawning the legends of vampires in Eastern Europe because of my cold skin and ability to avoid death. And because of, I like to think, my youthful good looks, I do not age accordingly, or as a human would. I still look the same as I did when I got here 3,500 years ago. And I sought retribution at that time against those who had taken me captive. This was one of the first experiences that I had with actual revenge, the concept of revenge. The suffering that was visited upon me at the hands of these merciless perpetrators was unconscionable. Their complete, vapid response to, I didn't have cries of pain. My reasoning with them, my reasons were sound on why they should not do this, not just to me, but to anyone of their species, fell on deaf ears. And so I was forced to show them the little power I learned that I had on this planet. And over the years, as I extracted my my revenge on those people responsible and their families, I became almost different. I became a very vengeful and jaded individual. It was noticed by my peers and those around me and those that had known me. And I became very arrogant, understanding that I did have afforded to me on this mission powers that by human standards were considered supernatural. I had the ability to heal myself. I had the ability to not fly, but to transport myself quickly from one point to another and survive falls from very high places, or seeming to. In reality, I was just unbreakable, so to speak. Still am. My time will not end here until my time ends here. And I cannot be killed by earthly hands. And I don't say that as a challenge. Please, if there's any nut jobs out there, hopefully they won't be buying these CDs. But I say that because I'm here on a mission. And when I met Rasputin that first day and he looked at me and I felt that twinge of fear that I'd not felt for hundreds of years, it really drew me to him, to be honest. May seem like a different side of emotion than would be normally exhibited in that type of situation, but I was drawn to him. Perhaps the same way people are drawn to those that may seem dangerous to them. Rasputin was a very deep and troubled man on many levels. He understood almost too much for a person of his mental capacity. He'd been given too much wisdom by the ones, more than he could handle, and it drove him mad. And he began experimenting with healing others through prayer when he was quite young. And he told me that the first few times that he felt this spirit overtake him, he wasn't able to control it, and sometimes actually made people worse. And that's what had led him into this self-imposed exile. That's what had driven him to this life of pilgrimage, was trying to make up for, atone for these sins he believed he'd somehow committed. And what he later realized in life, by the time I met him, was that the power that had taken these individuals through his hands was not his own. He was merely a vessel through which it transferred or poured. And as we began talking that first day, I, of course, exhibited no external signs of any kind of trepidation or concern. I'd learned long ago to not show my hand, so to speak, and keep my cards close to the vest. And I asked him, quite frankly, quite bluntly, would you like me to show you how to take this power to the next level? I did this without knowing really what I was talking about. I was bluffing. I wanted to find out just how powerful the source that came through this gentleman was, where it came from, where it was going, and moreover, what cultural paradigm did he come from that allowed him to be open to this type of interpretation. And he said yes, almost before I'd finished asking, which again caused me great concern. This was someone who, much like a man I met in the late 60s, who was a musician by the name of Jim Morrison, an American. Rasputin pushed constantly the bounds of what he could try to manipulate in his surroundings. The example would be a group of nomadic people had killed a deer, and they were all about to, they cleaned it and put it on a spit and roasted it over a fire, and they were about ready to eat it. And Rasputin ran in and said the meat was cursed, and they needed to purify it by throwing it on the fire and allowing it to burn, and that by the burning of the impure animal and by their suffering, their hunger pangs would be testament to the fact that they had survived another day, evading the clasps of these forest demons that inhabited this particular forest. And his story went on, as he later told me, to include not just demons within the forest, but demons within the people themselves. That they were somehow exorcising these demons by going without. And he did this being very, very hungry at the time himself, and knowing that these people were starving, because he wanted to see how far he could influence the outcome of that particular situation. He wanted to see if these people would go along with it. If he told a big enough story with enough scary details, would they go along and believe him and actually throw that venison on the fire and watch it burn while they starved? They didn't starve to death, but they were very hungry. Very difficult to hunt while you're hungry. Very difficult to be patient while you're hungry. And Rasputin, I think he honestly regretted that particular experiment, but it stuck with him over the years, because he knew that by preying on people's fear of what he always referred to as demons, many people referred to as demons, both internal and external, there was a carnal fear that was awoken in those that he was taunting with this. People get nervous when you start talking about demons, because most people have seen something that they would, or felt something that they would akin to being a quote-unquote demon. People who live in the forest for a time experience sounds that they don't hear when you first get there, when you first walk through. Spending a lot of time in the forest, becoming in tune with what's going on there, allows a lot of people, a lot of humans, to hear things that they would not normally hear. And those voices can sometimes be very sad, as I discussed in the last volume. And sometimes the sound of weeping can be mistaken for the sound of ecstasy. And sometimes it can be mistaken for the sound of gut-wrenching horror or fear. When in reality, what it is just a natural expression of anything that feels sad sometimes and happy other times, and it expresses itself accordingly. What Grigori realized was that people, because they had this internal instinctual fear of these strange voices that so many humans hear, that by being able to show them how to eliminate this in their lives, he could heal them, as he said, from a great many things. Because these demons that most of you carry around with you, and I say most of you because I've met very few people who have been released from the bonds of these struggles. They can take on an internal form. Sometimes in my travels, I have met women who have given up biological children for adoption. And they have struggled with that for their entire lives, wondering if they made the right decision, wondering if that child had a good life, if that child ever thinks about her, wonders about her, knows about her. Sometimes this drives these women mad. There are people who suffer abuses as children or even as adults, who for one reason or another never find someone in whom they can confide these personal wounds, and they carry with them these demons. The demons are not through fault of their own. The demons were put on them by someone else, but nevertheless they hear these voices, especially for humans, it seems like, especially during sleep. I run into a lot of people over the years. I've been brought in by those that I know personally to consult with people who are in positions of great responsibility, who are being troubled by nightmares. And one of the things that I have to explain, as I explained, I believe, in Volume 1, was that dreaming is about what to expect when you pass away, when you die. The landscape that exists in dream time is the same for all of us throughout the galaxy. We all dream. And when we dream, we go back to that spring from which we all come. And we can create our own reality there, much like we can create here in physical existence. But there is always a part of us, no matter how deep we go, there is always a part of us that hides itself from our consciousness. It's necessary for existence. It is, and let me explain why. That still small voice inside your head, the one that talks to you from inside your head, that guides you throughout your life, that nags at you when you haven't done something you know you're supposed to, or nags at you to seek redemption when you've done something you know you shouldn't. That is your holiest of holies, that is your heart of hearts. That exists in every sentient being. No one can truly know that voice or know the source of that voice. To do so would cancel out your existence in a very literal sense. The reason we exist in physical form is to have experiences, to go through things, so that on a spiritual level we grow. And if we don't have these experiences, or if we cut through line and cut right to the end, to the answer, we've learned nothing. Knowledge without wisdom is useless. It's just words. Words can be forgotten or misconstrued. Words, while they themselves do not have an agenda, are only ever used in concert with the respective being's agenda that's uttering them. It's been the same since the beginning of all time. I've studied extensively throughout the galaxy. Every society contains myths and lore of demons. Every species carries with it, some on a macro level, some on an individual level, different baggage, you might say. And these demons torture people. They are the negative energy, the dark energy that's contained in all of us. All of us contain the capacity for good and the capacity for evil. We're born with the capacity for everything inside us. The choices that we make affect the final product. But we're born a clean slate. There is no original sin. You're born with original sin, I guess, just as much as you're born with original good. And for some, they are truly victims of their environment. And they are allowed to come back. We're all allowed to come back if we choose. We're allowed to come back and exist in many different forms until we feel like we've learned enough to go back to the center of the spring. Which I can't tell you what happens then. No one knows. To know would again, you would cease to exist and go back to the first consciousnesses, that the ones that started it all, that started all of us, that we are a part of and spawned from, all at the same time. And Rasputin, not from cruel intent, but just from the pure fun of mischief, I guess, for him. Very strange man. Would create the feeling in people through his demeanor, through his mannerisms, through his speaking, where he would speak in very vague terms, as if he knew some dark secret about them. He was very good at judging people's reaction. He would wait until he saw the reaction he was looking for and follow that path. Before long, he would have them in such a fit that when he offered relief that only he could provide now, he'd led them down this path. They were lost in the thorns. Only he knew the way out. In the heat of the moment, a great many people subscribed to his mysticisms. He developed a great following. By the time he died, people would come from all over Russia to be in his presence, to have him speak to them. And as he grew older, his own wisdom made him insane, made him mad. I never saw true evil come from him, but I never saw good either. I saw only selfishness. And I say this story because he was brought in to help one of the Tsar's children, Alexei, I think was the name, who was a hemophiliac. And he was the one that told me that the Romanovs had my device, that he had seen it in a parlor on a shelf, and that it was unguarded, and that I should go and talk to so-and-so and get in and see about, retrieving my device. It was a setup. That was during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. And he had tried, I realized later, to have me killed. And it was an interesting situation for me to be in, because those feelings of wanting revenge again crept up into my conscious realm. Out of instinct and into rational thought, they bubbled. And I began to plot the torment of this deceiver. I would be scheming the deceiver. I would drench the soul of the non-believer and drive him to sanity, which for him would be like a normal person going crazy, going stark raving mad. But I was never able to get back to do this. And I went into hiding. The Romanovs knew who I was. We had met on several occasions over the years. The Tsars would call me in during times of trouble to negotiate treaties with the various principalities. And the lords and barons and the landowners, the business owners, would listen to me because they were always amazed at how much I knew about each one of them. And the tricks I learned during my time with Rasputin taught me a great deal about human tells, the signs that all humans exhibit when they're lying, the different directions they will look when they're lying or when they're telling the truth, is almost uniform in your species. It's very odd, especially in a galactic sense where lying has become so outdated, really. There's so many species who are empathic, or at least who are aware or know of empathic methods, that lying has all but ceased to exist. The menacing greys are what I would consider to be the closest thing to liars on what you would call an extraterrestrial sense. And they lie not because they have a reason to. They lie much for the same reason Rasputin did, because they like to cause discontent. They like to cause chaos. They're easily influenced by the dark energies that live in us all. And people like me battle against people like them. So it was strange that I spent this time with Rasputin. And it was strange to me looking back. I've had almost 100 years to think about this, and looking back at how easily I fell victim to this plot from someone who I knew was untrustworthy in every sense of the word, who rekindled these feelings of revenge that I had not felt for hundreds of years, and who I never had a chance to satisfy, to satiate that thirst that I had to get back at him. And now, as I enter the last stage of my mission, as I enter negotiations with the powers that be on your planet, and I tell these stories to them, these stories of great leaders throughout time, some who are known in histories and some who are not, some who've been forgotten or whose legacies have been overwritten as their respective empires crumbled and were overtaken by new societies, who rewrote the history books, who retold the great legends. The same 12 notes exist in music everywhere. Everywhere you go in the galaxy, it's the same 12 notes. Yes, on Earth, they decided an A would be 440. But everywhere you go in the galaxy, there's the same 12 notes. It's kind of a comforting thought that there is always that universal language, that universal way of speaking that will stand the test of time, that has always been and always will be. And as I go around and meet with these individuals and sense the frequencies on which they vibrate, I notice so many of them out of harmony with those they claim to be working in accord with. Does that make sense? I can feel a vibe from your species. I call it a vibe. Prince is saying that I just moved my headphones and made a bunch of noise. Sorry, my ear was itchy. I can feel a vibe from your species. And the best way that I can describe it is a harmonic frequency, much like you would hear as you played different notes, moved up or down the scale on an instrument. And different people emanate on different frequencies. You all have uniquenesses about you, but certain frequencies go together. I've heard some people tell me that people that are, Aries, Pisces, Virgos, they vibrate on different frequencies, and I guess there's some extent to that, because when you're born, or some basis to that, because when you're born, the galaxy is in the day on which you were born in the year, denotes the angle at which the Earth is aligned with the galaxy, and certain energies flow through the galaxy. And Hunya, that was the astrologist that went to live with the Incans in Peru, was very well versed in these energies and how they aligned. And as we would go into discussions on the alignment, the respective alignment with Delta Sol, with the rest of the galaxy, he would explain to us over the course of the Earth year equivalent where these energies were aligned and how they influenced people during that time. And when a baby is born, a baby is, I'll settle the myth right now, the myth on when life begins, because life does begin at conception. Life begins the second the sperm penetrates the wall of the egg. That DNA becomes fused. That growth of cells begins. And that is the spark of life. That is where we connect with the well of the souls. And that spring begins to feed us as we begin our existence in a physical form. I guess that's going to be getting me in trouble with people who are going to say that I'm weighing in on the abortion debate. You can do what you want with your species, with your bodies, with your offspring. It's not my concern. My concern is on a much wider macro level for your species. I'm beginning to feel worn down working here on Volume 5. I think Prince and Vince are also getting very worn down as this day wanes on. It's very difficult for me sometimes to explain this in a way that I feel is going to make sense. When you have as much bouncing around your head as I do, it's very clumsy to get it all out on the table. It's almost like if you haven't seen a friend in a long time and you're trying to catch up while waiting for a bus or a train, and you're trying to wrap up everything that's happened in your life, and he or she's trying to sum up everything that's happened in their respective life in those few brief moments before you've got to part ways again for who knows how long. That's what this feels like to me. These tapes that I'm recording now are going to end up being almost 12 hours in total length. For me, it's going to feel like a brief moment of time. It's very hard for me to slow down and remember all the things that over the years I've said, this is, if I ever tell my story, this is something I want to include in that story. I was run out of Russia because I knew too much. And as the Marxists, the communists took over in Russia, they used a lot of my, believe it or not, my ideology, which is that on a grand scale, we're all in this together. Our survival is the equation on which our survival depends is one in which we all play a part. We're all a moving cog in that equation, and each of our decisions influence the collective outcome. And when the communists took over, it was very difficult for a lot of the people that I knew because they had gotten used to living very extravagantly. They'd gotten used to cushy lifestyles, as Vince says. Very difficult for them to go back to a humble existence. And I fear for a lot of the people on Earth right now in 2010, over the next 2 years, the powers that be on your planet are going to purposely fleece your disposable income. Is that the term, guys? The money that people have available to spend on things? It's going to, the price of food, for instance, is going to get very expensive. The price of heating oil already in Europe is very expensive. Common necessities is what I'm getting at. Things that people would consider essential for survival. And compounding that will be weather increasing in severity. Up in Alaska, the HARP station, I've discussed this a lot in my YouTube videos that Vince has posted for me, and I have given up on trying to convince people the potential catastrophic forces they're unleashing up there. You're messing with things that you have no business messing with. And that combined with what's going on, or what could have potentially gone on at CERN had Locaire not gotten there when he did, which was a couple of decades ago, but that's when he started working with those individuals in Switzerland and in France, and he really put the brakes on a couple of projects that would have probably meant the not just the cessation of life on the planet Earth, but probably the disintegration, literally on a molecular level of this planet. And the technology that's available to most people here on Earth, when I say most people, I mean most, what you would consider like a general consumer, is a couple of decades behind the technology that is available to the elite. Even the U.S. military is limited by its own bureaucracy. There are certain divisions within the military that I learned about when I worked with the CIA back in the 90s that are autonomous enough and with large enough budgets that they can pretty much do what they want. The potential for disaster increases when science is mixed with business. And the military-industrial complex that was spawned out of the second, quote-unquote, World War here, mainly in America, mainly with certain companies that were very dependent on conflict to remain profitable, became very, very influential, unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., in the U.S. Capitol. These companies got on the radar of the powers that be because it became a new frontier in keeping the human race under their thumb. By developing these weapons, there is a weapon available that makes people expel their bowels. They mess their pants. It's a weapon that was developed by using very low sound frequencies and speakers that are very unidirectional. They can point one direction. These speakers are right now being used. I get correspondence from people all the time, again, about voices. We talked about this earlier with demons. But people who are convinced that, they're in the city or something, they're not out in nature where these voices might be normal. They're in a city, they're in an urban area, and they're hearing something talking to them. And these speakers or these devices, I call them speakers, I don't know if that's the technical term for them, they can aim sound and cause people to hear things that sounds almost like it's being implanted in your brain. This technology is used on a subliminal level in at least one of the main U.S. Global retailers in Walmart. They started using this in Walmart years ago from a study that was done at Cornell. They had run the study on implanting subliminal messages in the music that was playing in the background at grocery stores. And they would implant messages like, buy 1 loaf of wheat bread and 2 loaves of white bread, or something. I don't know the exact messages they might have used to begin with, but they started realizing they would put these messages in and people would buy out these products. Sometimes they would empty the shelves. And this was used by the marketing industry, by the retail industry, and still is today. Trust me, it is. The U.S. government has put laws in place, but it's kind of like a speed limit in the middle of Wyoming. There's no one there to enforce it. And even if there was, they probably wouldn't care enough to track you down and give you the ticket. You don't know when you're being subliminally, I can't talk, it's getting so late, subliminally influenced. That's the whole nature of it being subliminal. And this technology scares the powers that be because they're always susceptible to needing to bring on new members, new people to do their bidding. I call them their minions, but that's just my silly phrase for it. Thugs, gangsters, hitmen, enforcers. people who are willing to run for office. You would be amazed what it takes to run for political office in a Western culture right now. In the United States of America, it takes millions of dollars. The people who are allowed to be cultured and groomed for these positions over the years give up their very souls sometimes to these people. At least that's what they believe, making deals with the devil, so to speak, to attain these positions of power. And they attain these positions of power almost uniformly because they crave something of the flesh. A lot of times it's attractive people to have sex with, or money to live an opulent lifestyle, eat the best food, surround yourself in the nicest surroundings, comforts, which can be argued from an anthropological standpoint, by the way, that that's not necessarily selfish in a bad way. That's self-preservation. Sedentary lifestyle is nothing new for the human race. The Romans were incredibly sedentary. The Romans sat around and did nothing. They only broke a sweat when they would beat their slaves. The Romans were a very interesting society because they very much believed in what they were doing, but at the same time never created any boundaries within their society from a cultural standpoint, from what we would call, in my profession, no sense of religious boundaries that would preclude them from debauchery. Of course, they had gods and religion, but there was a series of justifications they could use or penances they could pay to offset these sins. Kind of like what my Catholic friends do when they go out and do things they shouldn't, and then go to a priest and confess. A system, by which they can be absolved or believe they can be absolved of their sins. It's legitimate. Happens in every culture. Your sins are only what you make of them. They're what you carry with them. Your sins are not transposed onto those around you, or transferred onto those around you. They're your sins. You can keep them or you can throw them away, much like your demons. Most people, I think, have the capacity to have this be their last life and enjoy it, especially in this day and age. With the amount of knowledge that is available to your race, there's really no excuse why you should not move forward after this life. This stuff is readily available to you. You can go to just about any, what would you call it, a place of religion, a church, synagogue, mosque. You can go to any house of worship. Perhaps that's a better term. Or just about any house of worship. I guess there's some out there that are nefarious in their intent. And experience people who deeply believe what they preach. That in itself will move your soul forward. Being around someone who is very passionate about affecting change for good. And the reason is that those frequencies that they give off are easier to become in harmony with for most people. It's easier to harmonize with a C and a G than it is with a, G flat seventh and a F in the bass. You've got to unlearn what you have learned. Do you remember that phrase? That was a good one. When Star Wars came out in the 70s, I had just gotten back from Pakistan, and I was in San Francisco, California, in the United States. And I was taken to the cinema to see Star Wars. It was a drive-in cinema. We went in a car, And I sat on the roof of the car and watched in amazement this fun and clever adventure that these humans had created in their cinema. And very much enjoyed the first two Star Wars movies. The second one with the little Yoda guy was really funny to me. Myself and my peers, when we talked about it later, joked that that would have been a good nickname for our professor back on Nibiru. She would have been a perfect Yoda. Because that was a phrase she said often. You must unlearn what you have learned. As we imagine you're born this gigantic white piece of paper. I use gigantic white pieces of paper a lot in my analogies, and a very specific reason for that. I'm sure many of you get that. Imagine you're born this perfect, pristine, clear piece of paper. And on that paper, anything can be written. Immediately from the moment you're born, something starts to be traced. Patterns form. Areas of the paper are used, areas of the paper are not used. The areas of the paper that are not used fall off and become forgotten. They pass off into time. The areas that you circle out and retain, you begin circling inward like a Mandelbrot fractal. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And each level you go to, each time you write something on that paper, it's almost as if a new space opens up on which you can write. And over the course of our lives, we all, no matter what species we all write our own book. We write our own story. You're in control of what you do with your life. You're in control of what you make of your life. In many respects, you're in control of every aspect of your life. You can create better surroundings for yourself if you know how to think the right thoughts. I could tell you what the secret is. You may not believe me, but I'll tell you what I believe, at least, that it is. And that's to envision very clearly what it is you hope to become. If you have a presentation to give at work, rehearse it well. If you have a conversation coming up with someone that you care about, that you want to go a certain way, that you want to convey certain things, rehearse that ahead of time. Imagine in your mind how it's going to go. Create that reality. Because what that does is it gives you a roadmap to follow. Everybody has in their minds what they hope will happen. A lot of people think that they're powerless against this, that they exist in this existential space where they're just existing. There is no good or bad. There is no positive or negative. It's all arbitrary. It's all mathematics. I used to think Locare thought that way. I can tell you that. I no longer do. My throat is very dry, and Vince recommended I chew a piece of gum. And I don't usually chew gum. I hope it doesn't make any noise on this tape. Can you guys hear it? It's a very unusual flavor. What is this called? Peppermint. I don't really care for that. It tastes bitter. I began, I guess, rebelling against the Emperor At various times during my mission here, during my 3,500 years on the planet, I have rebelled at different times. Never felt any feelings like revenge or those that I spoke of earlier, any deep hatred or anything like that, because I knew what I was getting into when I signed up for this. I have to take accountability and responsibility for what I chose. And I do have a very good existence. I've been allowed to experience a culture that is unaware of that which has gone on in the galaxy, that which I've always taken for granted. The naivete of the human race is something that I find very endearing. It's like being around children. There's an innocence about you that I've always found inspiring. It's another reason I think you should be proud to be human. Humans all possess a certain wide-eyed innocence. The feeling of learning something new for many of you is a rush, is what I've had it described. It's a rush, a feeling of euphoria sweeping over you. Mild at times, sometimes pronounced, but good nonetheless, a good feeling. It's because a part of your brain is receiving electricity and chemicals for sometimes the first time in a long, long time. That's what causes you to feel that way. And when that happens, you are writing that moment into the Akashic record. And that is, you're writing everything into the Akashic record at all times. But that's one of the ones that you'll be able to access later on down the road if you need to, is those little spikes in consciousness where you feel alive, you feel good, you feel at peace, you feel content. It's a good feeling, isn't it? It's what we all strive for. And that's what's tempered my disobedience with the Emperor over these years. Because there were times, even recently, a few messages ago, that I let Vince work on the translations. I was in the doghouse because I had said too much. I don't know, to be honest with you, if I'm going to be in the doghouse after this. I assume he won't know about it, or if he does, it'll seem inconsequential to him. That's why I'm not going to put these tapes on YouTube. That's why I only want people who want to find Yahweh, who want to seek me out for my specific set of tools and knowledge. Those are the ones I'm interested in sharing this with, not the masses. The masses can have the other stuff. This stuff is special. I will continue to exist for a long time after everyone listening to this message is dead and gone. You will pass into the record. Some of you to be reborn again, some of you to go back to the spring from which we all come. But I will go on for much, much longer. And what makes this is hard to explain because I look at time so differently than you two. It's perceived so differently to me than it is to you. But this small part of my life that this will end up being is hopefully going to influence generations to come of your people, of the people of Earth, of Delta Soul, for whom I care so deeply. I care about you people much the same way Yeshua did. I see the good in so many of you. The random acts of kindness that I see every day all around the planet, everywhere I go. In some societies, the elders are more revered than in others. If you are a person who does not have respect for your elders, you need to find some quickly. It's one of the oldest sins is to not respect your ancestry, not to respect those who have come before you, whether by biological relation or not. People who have gone through, who have contributed to the fabric of existence. As a pioneer blazing that trail in front of you, you need to give them your respect. Especially your race, the human race, where so many can come back. The concept of karma is universal in all educated, advanced, intellectual societies. The concept that doing good things begets good things happening to you, and doing bad thing begets this, bad things happening to you. And that's not to say that the powers of the universe conspire against you or help you out on occasion. There's two directions going on at any given time. The direction with which you lean will determine the direction that you are pushed. Are you leaning towards the good in your life and being pushed towards the good? Or have you fallen back into the dark and allowed yourself to be pushed downstream with so many? The human race will survive. But those of you right now who are listening to this tape will be gone by the time I get home. It's a very hard thing for me to say, because I really have enjoyed my time here on Earth. I've learned more than I thought I would on this mission. I've found out more about myself than I thought I would on this mission. I think I'm going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. I'm exhausted. It's very hard going through all this. For every word I say, there's 10 in my head. And for every 10 words in my head that I consider saying, there's 100 thoughts. And for every 100, for every thought that I have, there's 1,000 emotions. And it just cascades from there backwards. The sum of my experiences, what I hope to convey, and I know I have 4 more of these to record, and I have plenty more of material to say. I shouldn't say material. We say material when we've been talking about this, Prince and Vince and myself, because I'm trying to get this as compartmentalized as I can. I know that may sound crazy as you've listened to this and listened to me go back and forth and ramble on and kind of take these sidetracks, but this has been very good for me. I hope it's given you some insight into who I am as a person, because during my time here I have become aware of an aspect of myself that I was unaware of, that is very human-like. That is the part that craves knowledge and recognition for my achievements, from a selfish standpoint, but not from one of negativity, but from one of I want to feel proud about what I've done here. That's very important to me now. And that's something that I didn't really feel prior to coming to Earth. I never felt the need to feel proud. Pride was something that was kind of an alien concept to me. It seemed illogical on a base scale. Because what good would it do me to feel pride? What good would it do me if other people felt proud of me? It would do me nothing. I would not benefit anything from this. It's just an emotion. It could be easily replaced, swapped out for something else that would also not affect me. So it became as insignificant as all the rest. There's only one emotion that I believe every being feels at some time in their existence that actually matters, that actually they will take with them. And that is love. The love that a mother or father has for their child, a love that a child has for his mother or father, or the person that takes care of him, like Vince's babushka. That feeling pushes us forward on a spiritual sense, the feeling of love. At the end of the road, you will not remember the times you felt nervous or afraid. You won't remember, trust me, the times you felt angry. You won't remember the times you felt betrayed and alone. You'll remember the times you felt loved. And I can only imagine, and again, this is me speculating because I do not know, and I believe no one knows. But when we reach the highest level of consciousness, when we're allowed to cease our physical existences and go back and become part of the ones in the spring, in the well of the souls from which we all come, that is something that we take back, and that's why it grows, and that's why it continues to propagate, is because it's continually being fed by more love coming back into it. That may sound very new agey and hokey to some of you, but consider this. When you feel very close to someone and you get butterflies in your stomach when you're about to see them, when you think about them all day, every day, from the minute you wake up in the morning to the minute you go to bed at night, and you feel that deep, unconditional love, whether that be as an attraction for someone, as a mate, potential mate, or a companion, or whether that be the love of a parent or a grandparent or a family member. That love is powerful, and it pulls at your soul because it's one of the purest emotions available. It's one of the most powerful emotions available. It's very closely connected with comedy, with laughter. It's a good feeling, isn't it, to be in love, to feel appreciated. No one wants to be neglected or taken for granted. Everybody wants to feel like they're needed on some level and feel important. And you, I can tell you right now, listening to my voice, are so very important. Whatever it is you feel like you may have as a shortcoming or feel that you cannot do, that you're not capable of doing, I would ask that as you go to bed tonight, as you fall asleep, as you begin to dream, you envision yourself taking on that task. What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would you smell? What would you hear? What sensations would your body be experiencing as you did this thing that you believed previous that you could not? That could be playing a sport or an instrument that you didn't think you'd ever be able to do. That could be something crazy like flying That could be for my friend Carol in Indiana, a trip on a spaceship. Imagine this as you go to bed tonight. Try to picture what it would look like, what it would feel like. Because that is the first step to making that a reality for you, is envisioning it. You know, interesting, when the Spanish first got to Central America, a lot of the natives couldn't see the ships. They looked out into the waters, and some said, what are those things out there on the waters? And some said, what are you talking about? I don't see anything. This is what the legends say. Sometimes when you see things, I think that's what, quite frankly, a lot of people have troubles with UFOs over, is that sometimes people will see things, and because they have no reference point, they have no way of knowing what that is, their brain almost disregards it. Their conscious or subconscious disregards it being there. And imagining something, getting your head around what it would look like, what it would taste like, what it would feel like, what it would smell like, what it would sound like, is your first step in creating that reality. Anything is possible within each and every one of you. You right now listening to my voice, you can become a quote-unquote God. I don't mean to sound blasphemous when I say that. What I mean to say is that your potential is unlimited. When you dream, you can create anything you want. You can fly if you want to. When you realize you're dreaming, possibilities become endless. I think tomorrow morning, when we start Volume 6, I'm going to start with discussing lucid dreaming. Over breakfast, I'm going to discuss with Prince and Vince what they dreamt about tonight. Both of them have had previous conversations in depth with me about this very topic. They're rolling their eyes right now. Here it comes. Yes, boys, here it comes. The Dreamtime speech. Because I tell this to people all the time. Dreamtime is the space in which we all exist as one. You can find me there. I can find you if I knew who I'm looking for. But I'm very easy to find. As you fall asleep, think of my voice. Think of Yahweh of the Anunnaki. And as you drift into your own dream time, smell me out. I smell like warm sugar cookies baking in the oven. That's what I think like, at least. Or I think I smell like. Prince and Vince are... yeah,